Well, I mean, that raises a really important point, I think, Harry. And I mean, notwithstanding the fact that the writers' skills themselves have to be competent, you know, the everything that's going down on page, that the syntax and the use of language has to be powerful, beyond competent, powerful. But for me, this is why I always say, if anybody asks me, I always say field research. Field research is key. Now, I've lived in all of the places, lived and worked and operated in every place that I set a novel in or set a part of a novel in. But I have still gone back to every single one of those places and deliberately walked the exact ground with my notebook and a pencil. And I've walked the ground by day and by night. I've timed how long it takes to get from that corner to that corner. I've noted how many buses move past between that hour and that hour. Field research, because it's got to be real. Because one of these,
that might be a little bit of a luxury, though, you know, because I wrote a couple of chapters in my second book, which were based in Afghanistan, and I just Googled the shit out of it to make sure that I was getting right, because there's no goddamn way I was going to go to Afghanistan and wander the streets just to get a few notes, because it's like, no, I'm not doing that. But
no, point taken. I am fortunate.
Yeah,
I am fortunate in that I can do that, and I can tell you it's not the income for my bloody books that's doing. I wish it was, but it is. But nonetheless, if you know, so I still maintain field research is absolutely vital, but research per se, it's got to be in depth. It's got and from all sorts of different sources. You know, Dr. Wikipedia will cut it up to a certain point, but then you need to go elsewhere, you know.
And I guess that's the benefit of writing in first person, because it's also about, it's the nuances of sight, smell, all that stuff, you know. So what is the character experiencing? I guess Hong Kong would have its own unique smells, be walking through markets and the sounds and the atmospheric feeling, how it affects your body and the humidity and heat. And I think only through describing that in first person are you able to immerse your reader in that whole experience. So it's about sharing the experience so that your readers actually believe that they're there with you.
Yeah, I was amazed to discover that, and in my research, that Kabul, the smog is worse than Beijing. It's incredible.
Horrendous.
It's this thick smog that sort of sits over the whole city.
You can chew it. Yeah, it's horrendous.
Yeah, so I made that sort of a big part when he's trying to get around the city. So yeah. But
so I guess what we're doing, you know, maybe, you know, for me, what this is all about realism and authenticity. I think, because I want to be that as much as I can, bearing in mind, of course, that it is a fictional and to some degree fictitious, because real places exist and real positions in power exist, but they're different characters. So, you know, you want to keep it real, and if I may, Jack, you know, Jared O'Connor's the way he goes about his business. I mean, it's obvious that if I may say so, I mean, you've completely nailed the authenticity and the realism of the police procedures that O'Connor, that Jared's, you know, using, that he's using on his investigations. So it's easy for a reader to go, just even if they don't know anything about police procedures, it's easy for them to just get the feel that this is real. And that's what I just think it's so important.
Yeah, and thanks for saying so. And it's definitely, it's about the subtleties. And again, I think with any writer, going back to write what you know, I know it's a cliche, but really, in order to really maximize the feeling of authenticity for your reader, if you've experienced it and lived it, you can share it and you can convey that accurately, even in a fictional setting. It's so important.
I think absolutely. Though that, you know,
of course, Harry, the same thing applies for you. Sorry, mate. With know, as you know, with the whole paramedic thing, it's obvious that what's being experienced by the characters is real. Yeah, you know, this stuff happens.
It's you know, we are obviously writing from a relatively privileged position of having that experience, and you know, you've got the other writers that are now sort of trying to write something along these lines. The thing is that there are people who have experienced these things. If you want to know, ask them. Just go ahead and ask them. Get that information, because then you can use their knowledge and stand on the shoulders of giants, or whatever the phrase is, to build your story. Rather, you don't have to have been a copper, a paramedic. You don't have to have been in the army to be able to write a fictional story. However, go and ask the people who have been. And that is what you need to base your story on, is that fact, that knowledge that you can then bring out and use, and then pitch it back to them. You write it, you pitch it back to the person.
Does this make sense?
Does this make sense? Is this right?
Real?
Does this work? Does it sound real to you? And if it doesn't, why doesn't it? And that's how you're going to get that authenticity. You don't have to have been, an astronaut to be able to write The Martian.
Yep. And look, that's a wrap. That's the podcast right there, don't you?
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. I mean, I've got experiences and skills, but for example, I'm not a qualified sniper. But book 2 has a very particular scene involving that skill. So I picked up the phone and I rang a mate of mine who is and has been an operational sniper. We had a big long chat. I sent him the extract. He sent it back. I said, nah, change this to that. I didn't want it super technical, but and that was how I got that scene.
There was a scene in book 3 of mine, which is a terrorist plot with a plane, and there is a scene with a fighter pilot. And I haven't been a fighter pilot. I haven't a bloody clue. Just happen to know a paramedic who's married to a fighter, or is a partner's a fighter pilot, and so managed to use that connection and said, can you have a read of this and see what you think? And made some significant changes to what I'd said, like we wouldn't actually give our name to stuff like that, it wouldn't broadcast our name, and other sort of tweaks and changes. And it was, it gives that authenticity. Don't have to be a pilot though.
I think the general point is, if I may, is that, it's just about working your hardest to make your story as real and as authentic as you can. But there's a fine line, without making it too super technical about that sniping shot with, with the Coriolis effect and the, the spinning of the earth, and no, that's out. But and again, I think readers will mark you up for it. They will go, I really enjoy this, because I just get this feeling that all of a sudden now, and to use that other example I used, all of a sudden now I am a sniper and I can pull off this shot. But it is about working hard. It is a hard grind to get it real and get it authentic.
I think that the risk is when, for those areas where we might have to research outside our expertise, and we've done a lot of research, and maybe we've done hours and hours of research, and we've gone down that rabbit hole only because we want one nugget, maybe one sentence that we're going to take out of that. But God damn it, I've done a lot of research and I want my readers to know how smart I am. So we give them pages and pages of exposition around all the research. So I think, that's the trick for all of us who are endeavoring on this gig of writing, that if we are doing that research to try and bring in that authenticity, it's not so much about showing how clever we are. It might only be 1 or 2 sentences that we drag out of all that research that will just add that little shred of authenticity around a particular way in which he holds the weapon or breathes and calms himself before he takes that shot, instead of it becoming a user guide of how to become a sniper. That's not what writers need. Exactly.
So in my case, I knew straight away I didn't want to get that super technical, because my mate went down that path. I said, well, this is all very good and interesting, but no. But in my case, it really was you nailed it just then, Jack. Have you read my book? Is just before the sniper, and I'm not going to tell you who the person was, takes the shot, they just judge the wind drift by the pennant on the back of somewhere in close proximity to the target. And that is probably not something that I actually would have thought about. It's an obvious thing, it would appear, but again, my mate said, just before you squeeze off that shot, you always make the last adjustment for windage. So look at something in nature and make your guess.
And it could be as simple as that. So that's excellent advice. We've been talking about authenticity and using location as character. What I'd like to move on now is, and these are a couple of points you provided, Andy. What you referred to as the three keys to a banger action thriller, and the three topics generally are human characters and or characteristics, and we kind of touched on that a little bit in terms of the anti-hero side of things, but we can sort of flesh that out a little bit more. And also the bad guy, what makes a good villain, and also, you know, delving into realism, authenticity. We've covered off on that in terms of location. So we'll take a look at those kind of three areas in a bit more detail. So in terms of human characters, maybe if we focus on the protagonist, our hero, our main character, and again, in the context of how do we do this well for a thriller? It's action, fast-paced. Readers expect it to be a page turner. How do we keep our readers engaged? So how do we do that through, like your words? We've already talked about the characters flawed. Maybe they're rough edged, they're resilient, but they've got their own self-doubt. You know, so they have some weaknesses. They act and speak like real people. So what are your thoughts, Andy, around that in terms of making your protagonist believable and relatable?
Well, the first point I'd make, I guess, is that I think every character in the work has got to be that. Sorry, not all flawed, not all plagued by doubt, but they have to be relatable, and not little cardboard cutouts, little cookie cutters that you've just chucked in there to pad out a scene, or because, oh, I need a foil to this person or whatever. So, you know, you've just got to, gosh, it's such, it seems so easy, but it's not. It really is probably one, gosh, I mean, every writer, big writer will say, in fact, I read Lee Child somewhere saying that character is king, words to that effect. And I'm pretty sure King himself, Stephen King, in his amazing book on writing, also says almost identically the same thing. So if you bugger up your characters, then your book's going nowhere. Because people would prefer, or as a reader, I would prefer to see somebody or read about someone that I can relate to, and they would be people that are more like, they would tend to be people who'd be more like me, or with characteristics that I would like to possess, perhaps. So as a consequence, if they're more like me, they are going to be pretty flawed. I'll put my hand up to that. They will have made some pretty dramatic and stupid errors in their life. They will be struggling with issues. I think we all do to some degree or other. Whether or not it's kind of terminal to the way they perform is another matter. But you know, so they've got to be kind of like me, but they've also at the same time got to be able to ride that stuff out, because I'd like to be reading that and go, yeah, you know, oh God, that's totally how I feel. And oh my God, it's so good that he can do that. He can get himself out of that hole.
Resilience is what you're talking about.
Resilience, yeah. So is there a lesson in there for me? You know, I'm not talking about making writing didactic. It's all a lesson. It's all, you know, not at all. But I think that people relate to people that they know, or, you know, or people know people that they can relate to. You know, we don't hang around with look at your bunch of mates. They're not by and large men or women that are unrelatable to who you are. And that's really what your characters as a writer have got to be. They've got to kind of become, even the nasty ones, they've got to become part of the friendship circle of the reader for that period of time, I think.
I think one of the aspects is that with any character, for me, is dialogue is key, because often if you're not in first person, you don't know what they're thinking. And the only way you're going to get that is by description of their body language and how they talk. And so getting the dialogue right and getting that individual's voice across each time for the individuals. I can't remember that we did do a podcast recently with respect to, you know, you should be able to tell who's speaking without putting the dialogue tag on because of the way they speak. And, you know, so dialogue is such a key aspect of writing and getting your characters right.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, that whole character's voice that we spoke about a little earlier, And again, what does that have to be? It has to be authentic. You know, the reader has to believe it. They have to hear those words coming out of that person's mouth as they've imagined him or her.
Yeah.
That's the trick.
And that's been one of my I've spoken about this before. One of my comments or criticisms of watching, say, Australian police shows, where I'll say, look, clearly whoever's advised the screenwriters doesn't have any policing background, because coppers in Australia don't speak like that. You know, and I guess the viewers or readers don't know any better, but for someone who's been there and knows, you know, and I guess that's the frustrating part. And I think that's when readers do appreciate when there is authenticity, and it's not cliche, it's not cookie cutter. You know, people speak the way, you know, the color in their language and the way they speak, and you know, it's so important to get that right.
Yeah. Well, you know, Galahad Jones is, I guess, probably one of the better words to describe him is he's sardonic, you know, and bordering on a bit of a bitter smartass. And maybe there's a little of me in that. I don't know, but you know, to the extent that he, you know, he pisses people off around him with some of the things he says. But you know, how relatable is that? Because we've all got mates or family members who do that. We do it.
And I see you nodding, Harry, because I'm thinking already your character Jono, who's probably got a few of those.
Jono's got a slight, yeah. I mean, I think there was one patient that he does. It's like, you're a bloody smart ass, aren't you? And he's like, some people say that's my most endearing quality. You know, so, yeah, he is a smart ass, and yeah, it doesn't hold back a lot of the time. As I say, he says the things that I can't really get away with most of the time.
Yeah.
So we've spoken about authenticity in terms of the characters and protagonists. Let's focus on the villain, the bad guy.
Yeah.
And a comment that you've made previously, Andy, is a villain who's weirdly engaging. So we're not talking about your evil, you know, Dr. Evil or one of your James Bond villains who are just evil for the sake of being evil. It's and again, it's a comment you've made, is that a protagonist could easily have been me if I had made similar choices. And one example I can give you that comes to mind is I've just only recently been watching a series on Apple TV called Dark Matter. Joel Edgerton, Australian actor, is in it, and I've watched right up until I think episode 8, and there's one more episode to go, and it drops on Wednesday. But what it is, and again, no spoilers, because it's such a really complex concept that I can never give away spoilers because there's so many different things happen. But essentially, it's about he's a physicist, and he's discovered a way to open up these doors to an alternate world where if you it's almost like the sliding doors effect. If you had made a certain decision, how could your world have changed, or how could your life have taken a different trajectory? But sometimes they intersect, and it turns out that he ends up going down these alternative worlds where his life could have been different. And it almost what actually happens is different versions of himself end up at the same location, and one of them is almost like a villain, but it's him, but it's him. It's who he could have, it's who he became because of certain experiences in life, and he became this guy that was almost, it was like a villain, but it was looking at yourself, looking, you know, that dark mirror, looking at yourself, looking at as the villain. You know, here I am, I'm the good guy. So there's actually two different versions, and there's also different extremes of the same character, but it's the same character with the same memories, the same experiences, but because they were sent down different life's journeys, and their two journeys intersect, one has become a villain and one is kind of the hero, but it's the same person. And you know, it's that whole notion of nature versus nurture, and how a person's experiences can make you become a so-called villain. But it's that question of how far could each of us be pushed before we do something to save a loved one, or, you know, what's our threshold, what's our trigger point? And they're the sort of heroes that I really like, where you actually, they are that dark mirror. They're holding up a mirror to yourself, saying, how would I act if I was in that same position? How would I act if my family were killed? Would I be prepared to kill in the name of vengeance and justice? You know, that those sort of questions are raised all the time. What would a good person do? You know, we saw anyone who's seen the John Wick movies, you know, that all started because John Wick dog got
Dog
killed.
got killed.
Killed his
And
dog.
he's out to kill these people in the name of vengeance.
I don't know whether it started there because he was an assassin to start with.
Well, there was that. There was that. Yeah.
And it all went
Don't
pear-shaped
kill
for the
an
baddies
assassin's
when they killed
dog.
his dog.
Yeah. So I know that's a bit of a long-winded way of posing the question, but how do you apply that kind of thinking, Andy, in terms of how you devise your villains?
Yeah. Well, again, you know, he has to, he, she, and I do have a couple of female baddies as well, have to be relatable, have to be believable. And, you know, your super arch evil Bond villain from Spectre, I mean, they work well in that context, no doubt. Yeah, fantastic, but just completely unbelievable. So you know, if starting from the premise that my protagonist, my so-called hero, in actual fact, anti-hero, as we discussed, is this sort of character, this sort of person with all these things, how, as you just said, how much more layered on top would have made him the bad guy? So how different really is Galahad from the bad guys the truly bad guys, the ones that are pulling the strings? And you know, it is totally, I absolutely put my hand up, it absolutely is a cliche, but that classic line about, you know, we're not that much different, you and I. You know, during the sort of the showdown, or the evil, you know, the evil genius monologue, right? Might not be during something like that, but that point will come across at some point, maybe more than once, that really the hero of the piece actually is just a hair's breadth away from the evil doer of the piece. And the evidence is all there. So the bad guy's got to be I think the bad guy, first of all, has got to be someone that is believable, that you know, has their own failings, and they can't be a superhuman bad guy, I don't think. You know, they need to be able to, well, they need to mess up. You've got to write mistakes into their plot. But I would like my reader to be looking at the bad guy and be thinking, God, you know, that's so believable. I could, you know, if I had just done that when I was thinking about that back in the past, I could have been like that. To your point, Jack, you know, that whole sliding door thing, because, you know, that's often, and again, you know, layering back on police experience, I'm sure you'll agree that with the exception of certain personality types, it is a fine line between a law-abiding citizen with good community values and someone who just goes right off the deep end, and creating mayhem and chaos and death. So, you know, that fine line is always something I like to explore, because that's also a fine line that my protagonist walks, and who's going to fall off at first, really.
And it's that question of the means justifies the ends. You know, what bad things is a good person willing to do for the greater good? And you often have some of those heroes where perhaps they have to do some very bad things, but it's justifiable, and people who read that story or watch them can kind of understand. I often talk about the True Detective series, the very first one with Matthew McConaughey and Eddie Harrelson. That was the best, I think, out of all of the True Detective. I think it's been about 5 series over the years. And these are both broken detectives. They've both got their own personal turmoil going on, and they actually have to do some very bad things in the interest of, number one, catching killers and stripping down some really horrible drug dealers. But ultimately it's about catching the serial killer, and they've got to do some really bad things. In fact, you know, they even have to kill some people to, you know, but when you watch them and think they're so driven to protect the community and to keep people safe and to catch this bad person, they are also prepared to do bad things. And there was a scene where they're lamenting in the car as they're driving, and one character says to the other, "Do you think we're bad men because of what we've done?" And the other turns to his partner and says, "The world needs bad men. We keep the other bad men at the door." And that makes me shiver whenever it makes me tingle whenever I see that. You know, it's such a powerful scene that I think we love to see these heroes that are willing to go the extra yard to do those extra things that perhaps a lot of us are not able to because we're bound by laws, and you know, police generally can't go and do those things. But that's why we love the Dirty Harrys and those sort of characters that are able to step over the boundaries, and you know, they're Teflon coated and they still come out the other end. But they're such relatable, and you know, we have that sort of feeling of empathy with those characters.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, you know. And you know, I suppose that kind of segues us into, you know, if the baddie's like this and the protagonist is like that and the other cast of characters are as they are, how do you tie that all in together realistically? You know, how do you get them all singing in the choir with a degree of realism and authenticity? And we keep coming back to those two words, don't we?
Yes. And the next thing I want to jump into, and it's kind of under the heading of realism and authenticity. And I think we've probably covered off on most of them in terms of location. You know, we talked about things like police procedures and field research and weapons, and again, I think we've covered off on that in terms of getting that advice to you know, to describe those accurately. But one thing specifically you made mention of that we're going to talk about was fight scenes. So because fight scenes are often so integral, or action sequences, whether it be a high-speed chase or a shootout or whatever action sequence is occurring, I think there is a real skill in how to do that effectively in the written form. We're used to seeing it on the big screen, but trying to convert that onto paper is a different skill. Tell us about your thoughts around writing fight scenes, or let's call it action scenes broadly.
Yeah, okay. So I come at that from a couple of different angles. The first one is my own personal experience. And you know, I used to box, so I do use boxing in the you know, in the novels. Galahad also happens to box. Big coincidence. So you know, I do use that, but when it comes to street fights, unfortunately, I have been involved in a couple of them over the years, both while in uniform and out of uniform. And I've never been comfortable with the way they're depicted, certainly on screen, with you know, with these two guys just going at it hammer and tong. Although these days there's certainly a lot more blood and gore, which is somewhat realistic, but they just go at it for minutes on end. And it just, in my experience at least, it just is not like that. So
10 seconds.
oh, yeah. So it's it's like gunfights as well, you know. Gunfights, again, in my experience, are right up close. They're inside 5 meters. They come unexpectedly, and they're quick, super quick. They're not 50, 60 rounds going down range and people changing magazines and all that sort of stuff going on. They're very, very, very quick. You know, at most, as long as it might take someone to empty a magazine. Oh, sorry, my laptop just fell then. Yeah, so gunfights are immediate. They're very close and they're quick. And the same with physical street fights. They are very quick, and of course they are up close, but they're not standing trading blow for blow for blow. They are immensely dirty, violent actions where the two combatants are using every single means at their disposal. So, you know, and it's unlikely that the majority of people involved in these sorts of actions, if you're a private investigator and you're jumped by a triad thug, it's unlikely that either of those has professional training experience. The triad thug might have a little bit of kung fu. The private investigator might be a bit of a boxer, but then it just all degenerates.
It usually goes into a grappling sort of situation.
Yeah, into a grappling and gouging and biting, and you know, until you subdue or kill your opponent. So, my fight scenes are pretty quick, which is also helpful for me because I don't have to go on and on and on about it. But what I do is I walk through them. So I choreograph the scene. I can see it in my mind, but I think, well, how does that actually work? Does it actually work to throw a right hook from that direction, or does it actually work for a kick from here to the knee? So I'll often be walking around the study with my notebook, and I'll choreograph the blows. And that's kind of how I do it. That's how I work to it, and just always mindful to keep it short, sharp, and super violent. And no one ever walks away from it in one piece. Even if Galahad wins that fight, he's an absolute mess.
So in terms of the writing craft, like you sort of touched on it, but so for anyone listening or advice to writers, I've heard it said that if there's an action sequence, short, sharp, even your sentences, your word choices are brittle, short, sharp, and that helps with the flow and the fast paced of the scene. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, exactly. So, very abrupt, aggressive language and very short and sharp sentences. And sentences that are not necessarily saying something. They might only be one or two, if it's really appropriate, it might only be one or two words that's just it's not revealing something inside, how the fight's progressing, but it might just be, I don't know, I'm just making this up now, but kick to the knee, full stop, grabbed the lower jaw and wrenched, blood, full stop.
Yeah.
So
I think the other thing is that if up and coming writers are wanting to portray those fight scenes, probably the worst things they can use is actually anything on movies, because they just don't happen.
It doesn't happen that way. It honestly just doesn't.
And the point that I was going to make is that the injuries that are sustained during a fight in a movie just are laughable, because I'll be looking at him going, yeah, he ain't gonna get up from that. There is no way that person is getting up from that. Or they, falls from distance. It's just like, you're not getting up from that. And if you're going to be in recovery, it's probably going to be in an ICU, not on somebody's sofa, where you're
swilling a glass of whiskey.
Yeah.
And how many head blows can a person be subjected to? Like the number of times there's a fight and the hero gets their head smashed against a concrete wall or against a steel pipe, bang, bang, bang. Probably the first one would have fractured their skull. The second one would have killed them. And they can get their head slammed 6 times, and Tom Cruise shakes it off the next one he's ready to fight again.
And it's really hard to knock somebody out effectively with one blow.
Yeah.
Even though it's the whole sort of one blow can be fatal. Yes, it can.
Yeah.
And that's the point. It can. Rather than knocking somebody out, you're actually killing them. Because if you hit them too hard, you'll kill them.
Yeah.
It's not rocket science.
And often I'll often talk about the shooting scenes where, because we see it, going back to your point, Harry, because we see it on the screen, you often see it being described in books like. Someone gets shot and they get thrown back 6 meters as if they're attached to a bungee cord, or get thrown out of a window for six meters because they get shot with a revolver. And the reality is, someone who gets shot, they might still keep coming at you, or they might drop to a knee, and the shot may not be fatal. Even if it is fatal, they're still bleeding out. They still have the capacity to still come forward and lunge at you with a knife. They're not going to necessarily be thrown backwards. So I guess it's all that stuff where we're so used to having the stuff thrown at us on screen that we often, all of us are probably guilty, and a lot of writers are guilty of putting that on our pages because it's what we expect.
One reality check is that any fall over 3 meters is considered a significant fall that would require a resus assessment of the patient. So so 3 meters is considered significant injuries will result.
And to your earlier point, Jack, if someone's shot, except potentially by a much heavier caliber weapon, they don't get blown back. They might fall back because they've sort of staggered a little, but they generally will just collapse
Hmm.
like a puppet with its strings cut. They'll just drop. Because particularly if the shot, and Harry, you would know this, particularly if it was a killing shot and it has actually killed them, just look, that's it. You know, no longer animated. So
I did a talk for a crime writers week thing, and showed a sort of diagram of the shoulder region and how many major blood vessels there are, nerves, numerous other things, the tops of your lungs, etc. And just because it's a shoulder wound does not mean the person's going to live, because it's complicated in that area. And so perhaps don't shoot your patient, don't have your character being shot in the shoulder, because that bullet can go anywhere from that point, especially if it hits the scapula. So
yeah.
And I've had to confess this previously in our previous chats where I've had scenes where my baddies are prone to getting shot in the shoulder, and because I don't want to kill them. They've got to be alive for the
arm.
They've got to be alive for the next book.
You shoot him in the arse. Shoot him in the arse.
Shoot the arse, yes.
Yeah, so my baddy's been shot in the hip and the shoulder and the hand and the leg, and he always comes back for more in the next book. Hey guys, we're probably at a point now we probably need to wrap up. We've covered off on all the things we had intended to. I'm sure we could chat more, and maybe Andy, if you're up for it, we could get you back on, and then I'm sure there's a whole lot of other writing related stuff we could just chew the fat over.
Well, I hope you've had as much fun as I have. It's been a blast, boys. Very
great,
and lovely to meet you both.
Yeah. Next time we need to do this is in a Brisbane bar somewhere over beer, and we'll.
That is absolutely right.
That's actually what we should do. A live podcast.
Yeah, we'll have to do that.
That could degenerate very quickly.
live streaming. Bloody hell.
All right, well, Harry Colfer, as usual, thanks. It's been a blast. Andy Edwards, thanks again. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks so much for your time.
You're more than welcome. Thank you.
And sharing your knowledge and experience, and hopefully people that are listening to this, particularly budding thriller writers, there's a lot of good stuff there for you to take away and think about. So on that point, we'll say goodbye. Thanks guys, and we'll see you next time. All the best, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.